Hello everyone, and welcome back to English with Mo. If you want to improve your English naturally while listening to powerful and inspiring stories, then you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new English story. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin today's story. Chapter 1. The Prison Called Fear. Ethan had always been afraid. Not of monsters, not of the dark, not even of failure. He was afraid of people. He was afraid of speaking. He was afraid of making mistakes. Every morning, he looked at himself in the mirror before going to work. He wanted to become someone different, someone confident, someone brave, someone who could speak without shaking. But every morning, he saw the same person. A quiet man, a nervous smile, eyes full of dreams, and a heart full of fear. He was 28 years old. He worked in a small office. His job was simple. He answered emails. He organized files. He prepared reports. Every day looked exactly the same. His coworkers liked him. They thought he was kind, helpful, polite, but they also believed something else. Ethan never talks. During lunch, everyone laughed together. They shared stories. They talked about sports, movies, travel, life. Ethan always sat at the corner of the table, listening, smiling, never speaking. Sometimes he had something funny to say. Sometimes he had a great idea. Sometimes he wanted to join the conversation. But then, fear whispered inside his mind. What if they laugh at you? What if your voice sounds strange? What if you say something stupid? So he stayed silent, again, and again, and again. After the work, Ethan walked home alone. He didn't like buses. Too many people, too much noise. Walking felt safer. One evening, while crossing a small bridge, he stopped. The city lights reflected on the river. People walked confidently around him. Some laughed loudly, some talked on their phones, some walked with purpose. Ethan watched them carefully. He wondered something. What makes them different? They're not smarter. They're not stronger. So why am I so afraid? He had no answer. That night, he couldn't sleep. He remembered something from high school. His English teacher had asked him to read one paragraph in front of the class. His hands started shaking. His voice became weak. Halfway through the paragraph, someone laughed. Then another student laughed. Soon, the whole classroom was laughing. The teacher tried to stop them, but the damage was already done. That single moment stayed inside Ethan's heart for years. Since that day, he avoided speaking, avoided attention, avoided every opportunity that required confidence. One memory, one painful memory, had become the prison where he lived. The next morning, his manager entered the office. Good morning, everyone. I have exciting news. Everyone looked up. We have an important meeting next Friday. A new international client. If everything goes well, our company will grow. The office became quiet. The manager smiled. I need someone to present our project. Everyone looked around. Some people avoided eye contact. Others pretended to work. Then, the manager looked directly at Ethan. Ethan, you prepared most of this project. I think you should present it. For a moment, time stopped. Ethan felt his heart beating faster. His hands became cold. His mouth became dry. All those old voices returned. You can't. You'll embarrass yourself. Everyone will laugh. The manager waited. So, what do you think? Ethan opened his mouth. He wanted to say yes. He truly wanted to. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. A chance to prove himself. A chance to finally change his life. But fear spoke first. I'm sorry. I don't think I can do it. The manager nodded politely. No problem. We'll ask someone else. The meeting ended. Everyone returned to work. But Ethan couldn't focus. He stared at his computer screen. He wasn't sad because he lost the opportunity. He was sad because he had lost to fear again. That evening, as he walked home under the orange sky, he suddenly noticed an old man sitting alone on a wooden bench in the park. The old man looked calm, peaceful. He was feeding birds with a small bag of bread. When Ethan walked past him, the old man smiled. Then he said something strange. "You look like someone carrying a very heavy backpack." Ethan looked down. He wasn't carrying anything. The old man smiled again. "I'm not talking about your shoulders. I'm talking about your heart." Ethan stopped walking. For the first time in years, a complete stranger had seen exactly what he was hiding. He slowly sat beside the old man. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. The birds continued eating. The wind moved gently through the trees. Finally, the old man asked one simple question. "What are you really afraid of?" Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Chapter 2: The Man Who Was Never Afraid. The old man looked at Ethan with kind eyes. He wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't trying to impress him. He simply waited. Sometimes, silence gives better answers than questions. Ethan looked at the birds on the ground. They were fighting over tiny pieces of bread. Then, a loud sound came from the street. All the birds flew away at once, without thinking, without discussing, without asking each other. The old man watched them disappear into the sky. Then he quietly asked, "Do you know why birds survive?" Ethan shook his head. "No. They survive because they move. They don't stay frozen. They don't wait until they feel ready. They simply fly." Ethan remained silent. The old man continued, "Fear tells us to stay still, but life rewards movement." Those words stayed in Ethan's mind. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan whispered, "I've been afraid my whole life." The old man nodded. "I know." Ethan looked surprised. "You know?" "Yes. I can recognize fear. I used to carry it too." Ethan frowned. "You?" The old man laughed softly. "Oh, yes. For many years. I was exactly like you." Ethan couldn't believe it. The man sitting beside him looked peaceful, confident, comfortable. Nothing about him suggested fear. "You don't look afraid." The old man smiled. "That's because you're meeting me after the battle." "Not during it." Ethan looked at him with curiosity. "What happened?" The old man took a deep breath. "When I was 25, I dreamed of becoming an architect. It was everything I wanted. I loved drawing. I loved buildings. I loved creating something that could live longer than I would. But there was one problem. I had to present my ideas in front of people." Ethan immediately understood. "I couldn't do it?" The old man nodded. My hands shook. My voice disappeared. My mind became empty. I failed every presentation, so I gave up. He looked toward the sunset. I spent 15 years working in a factory. It wasn't my dream, but it felt safe. I convinced myself that safety was enough. Ethan listened carefully. The old man's voice became softer. But every morning, I looked in the mirror, and every morning, I saw regret. Not failure. Regret. There is a difference. Ethan repeated quietly, "Regret." The old man nodded. "Failure hurts, but regret stays. It follows you for years. It whispers at night. It asks one painful question. What if you had tried?" The wind became stronger. Leaves danced across the path. The old man continued. "One day, my daughter came home from school. She wanted to sing in front of her class. but she was scared. She asked me, "Dad, what should I do?" I wanted to tell her to be brave, but I couldn't, because she knew. She knew her father had spent his whole life hiding. Ethan looked down. The old man smiled sadly. Children don't listen to what we say. They watch what we do. That night, I realized something. I wasn't protecting myself. I was teaching fear. Ethan felt those words deeply. The old man continued. The next morning, I made one decision. Not a big decision. Not a magical decision. A very small one. I decided to become uncomfortable. Ethan looked confused. What does that mean? It means doing one thing every day that scares you, no matter how small. I ordered food without pointing at the menu. I asked strangers for directions. I introduced myself first. I raised my hand during meetings. I accepted small presentations. Some days I failed. Some days people laughed. But something interesting happened. What? I survived. The old man smiled. I discovered something nobody had ever told me. Embarrassment cannot kill you. Mistakes cannot destroy you. But fear can steal an entire lifetime. Ethan felt his heart beating faster. It was the first time anyone had described exactly how he felt. The old man stood up slowly. He stretched his back. Then he pointed toward a nearby playground. Several children were climbing a tall rope tower. One little boy climbed halfway. Then he stopped. He looked terrified. His father stood below him. The father didn't climb up. He didn't carry the child down. He simply smiled and shouted, "You can do it!" The little boy stayed frozen. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Then, very slowly, he climbed one more step, then another, then another. Finally, he reached the top. He lifted both hands into the air. "I did it!" His laugh filled the entire park. The old man smiled. "You see?" The boy wasn't fearless. He climbed while he was afraid. He turned back toward Ethan. That is courage. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is moving while fear is still sitting beside you. Ethan felt something changing inside him. Not confidence, not yet, but something smaller. Hope, real hope. The old man reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out an old coin. It looked worn and scratched. He handed it to Ethan. "Keep this." Ethan looked at the coin. On one side there was a mountain. On the other side, only one word: begin. I carried this coin for 30 years. It reminded me that every great life begins with one small step. The old man smiled. "I think it's your turn now." Ethan held the coin tightly, for the first time in many years. He walked home without looking at the ground. Instead, he looked ahead, toward the road, toward tomorrow, toward the meeting waiting for him on Friday. And for the first time, instead of asking, "What if I fail?" he asked himself a different question. What if this is the moment that changes everything? Chapter 3: The First Brave Step. Ethan woke up earlier than usual. The room was quiet. Sunlight slowly entered through the window. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Then he remembered. The meeting, Friday, the presentation. His stomach tightened. The familiar voice returned. "You're not ready. Someone else can do it better. Don't embarrass yourself." He sat on the edge of his bed. His eyes fell on the old coin resting on the nightstand. Begin. He picked it up, closed his hand around it, and smiled. Not because he felt confident, but because he remembered something the old man had said. Courage is moving, while fear is still sitting beside you. At work, nothing had changed. People answered emails, phones rang, Printers hummed, coffee cups filled the air with their rich smell. Everything looked exactly the same, except Ethan. Inside, a battle had already begun. His manager walked into the office. "Morning, everyone. We'll have one last rehearsal tomorrow. The presentation is almost ready." Ethan looked down. His heart started racing again. The manager continued. "Michael will give the presentation." Michael smiled confidently. "No problem." Everyone nodded. The meeting ended, but Ethan couldn't stop thinking, that should have been me. During lunch, his coworkers laughed together, just like every day. Ethan sat quietly. Then something unexpected happened. Sarah, one of his coworkers, sat beside him. She smiled. "You always eat alone." Ethan smiled politely. "I guess I do." Sarah looked at him for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why are you always so quiet?" Ethan froze. He had heard this question many times. He always answered the same way. "I'm just tired. I'm just listening. Nothing special." But today, he decided to tell the truth. "I get nervous." Sarah looked surprised. "Nervous?" "I don't like talking in groups. I always think I'll say something stupid." Sarah stared at him for a second. Then she laughed. Not at him. With kindness. "Ethan, do you know what I think every morning?" He shook his head. "I think everyone is smarter than me." Ethan blinked. "What?" She nodded. "Seriously. I've worked here for 5 years. And before every meeting, I feel like they'll discover I'm not good enough." Ethan couldn't believe it. "You?" She smiled. "Confidence isn't something you're born with. It's something you practice." She leaned closer. "Can I tell you a secret?" Ethan nodded. "I'm terrified every single time I give a presentation." His eyes widened. "But you always look relaxed." She laughed again. "I've become good at looking relaxed." For the first time, Ethan realized something. The people he admired were afraid too. They simply didn't stop. That evening, instead of going straight home, he walked into a small bookstore. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He simply wanted to think. An elderly woman stood behind the counter. She smiled warmly. "Can I help you?" Normally, Ethan would say, "No, thank you," then leave. But today, he remembered the challenge. Do one uncomfortable thing. He took a deep breath. "Can you recommend a book about confidence?" The woman smiled. "I've been waiting for someone to ask me that." She walked to a nearby shelf, picked up a small notebook. Not a book, a notebook. She handed it to him. "This isn't for reading. It's for writing." Ethan looked confused. "Every night, write one thing you were afraid to do, and write whether you did it anyway." He nodded slowly. "That's all." She smiled. "Confidence grows from evidence, not from wishes. If you collect enough brave moments, your mind will stop calling you weak." Those words stayed with him. He bought the notebook. It cost less than a cup of coffee, but somehow, it felt priceless. That night, he opened the first page. He wrote today's date. Then, his first sentence, "Today I told someone the truth." He stared at those words. Then he added another. "I was afraid, but I did it anyway." He smiled. It wasn't a big victory. Nobody applauded, nobody celebrated. But deep inside, something had changed. For the first time, he had proof. Proof that fear hadn't won today. The next morning, Thursday, only one day before the presentation, as Ethan entered the office, his manager looked worried. "Everyone, conference room." Immediately, people exchanged nervous looks. Inside the conference room, the manager sighed deeply. "I just got a call." Michael is sick, very sick. He won't be here tomorrow. Silence filled the room. The manager looked around. We need someone else. Nobody spoke. Not a single hand went up. The manager looked disappointed. Then, his eyes met Ethan's. You know this project better than anyone. I won't force you, but I'm asking. The room became completely silent. Ethan could hear his heartbeat. Fear returned, louder than ever. His hands trembled. His breathing became faster. Every painful memory, every old failure, every voice from his past returned at once. He reached into his pocket. His fingers touched the old coin. Begin. He closed his eyes for 1 second, then remembered. The little boy climbing the rope, Sarah admitting she was scared, the notebook, the old man, the word, begin. Slowly, very slowly. Ethan stood up. His legs were shaking. His voice was shaking too. But this time, he didn't wait for fear to disappear. He looked at his manager and quietly said, I'll do it. The room fell silent. No one expected those 3 words, and neither did Ethan. Chapter 5. The door that fear had locked. The applause slowly faded. People gathered around Ethan. Some shook his hand. Others congratulated him. One of the international clients smiled and said, Your presentation was clear. It felt honest. We liked that. Ethan thanked him. But inside, he couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Just 3 days ago, he had almost said no, again. If he had listened to fear one more time, none of this would have happened. After the meeting, his manager invited him into his office. The office was quiet. Large windows overlooked the city. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the manager smiled. Sit down. Ethan sat. His manager folded his hands. I've been waiting for this day. Ethan looked confused. Waiting? The manager nodded. I've known you for almost 3 years. I've seen your work. I've read every report you've written. You solve problems before anyone notices them. You always help your teammates. You care about every detail. He paused. But you've always hidden. Ethan looked down. I know. The manager continued. Do you know how many times I wanted to promote you? Ethan's eyes widened. Promote me? Yes. But every leadership position required one thing. Communication. You never gave yourself the chance. Silence filled the room. The manager leaned forward. Ethan. The only person who believed you weren't ready was you. Those words hit harder than anything Ethan had ever heard. For years, he had blamed his childhood, his classmates, his fear, his bad memories. But maybe the biggest prison wasn't in his past. It was inside his own mind. That evening, instead of walking straight home, he returned to the small park, the same bench, the same trees, the same peaceful place. The old man was there again, feeding the birds, as if nothing had changed. Ethan smiled. You knew I'd come back. The old man laughed. I hoped. Ethan sat beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan placed the old coin in the man's hand. I think this belongs to you. The old man looked at it, then gently closed Ethan's fingers around it. No. It belongs to the next person who's afraid. Ethan looked at him. What do you mean? The old man smiled. One day, you'll meet someone exactly like you. Someone trapped. Someone waiting. When that day comes, you'll know what to do. The birds suddenly flew into the sky. Ethan watched them disappear. I thought fear would disappear after today. The old man nodded slowly. It won't. Ethan frowned. What? You'll still be afraid. Tomorrow. next month, next year. Ethan looked disappointed. So, nothing changes? The old man smiled warmly. Everything changes. The fear stays, but your relationship with it changes. He pointed toward the sky. When you first learned to swim, were you afraid? Yes. And the second time? A little. And today? I don't even think about it. The old man nodded. Exactly. Courage isn't killing fear. It's teaching fear where to sit. Ethan smiled. I like that. The old man continued. Fear should be a passenger, never the driver. Over the following weeks, people began noticing something different about Ethan. Not because he had become loud. He hadn't. Not because he had become the funniest person in the office. He hadn't. He was still quiet, still thoughtful, still kind. But something inside him had changed. When people asked for volunteers, his hand slowly went up. When clients asked difficult questions, he answered. When meetings became uncomfortable, he stayed. He no longer ran away. One afternoon, a new employee joined the company. His name was Daniel. He looked young, nervous, quiet. During lunch, he sat alone in the corner, exactly where Ethan used to sit. Everyone was talking, laughing. Daniel stared at his food, avoiding eye contact. Ethan smiled to himself. He remembered. He picked up his lunch tray, walked across the room, and sat beside him. Mind if I join you? Daniel looked surprised. Sure. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel whispered, I'm not very good with people. Ethan smiled. I know. Daniel looked confused. How? Because I used to say the same thing. Over the next few weeks, Ethan helped Daniel prepare for his first meeting, his first presentation, his first client call. Every time Daniel became nervous, Ethan repeated the same sentence the old man had once told him. Courage is moving, while fear is still sitting beside you. Little by little, Daniel changed, just as Ethan had changed. Months passed. Winter became spring. Spring became summer. One morning, the company announced a new department. A new team leader was needed. Everyone expected someone with years of experience, someone loud, someone confident. Instead, the manager smiled and said, I'd like everyone to welcome our new team leader, Ethan. The room erupted into applause. Ethan stood there in disbelief. Not because he thought he was perfect, but because he finally understood something. The promotion didn't happen because he had stopped being afraid. It happened because he had stopped letting fear make his decisions. He looked through the office window. The city looked exactly the same. The streets, the buildings, the people. Nothing outside had changed. The only thing that had changed was the man looking through the glass. Chapter 6. The bravest decision of all. 1 year later, the company looked different. There were new employees, new projects, new challenges, and in the middle of it all, Ethan, not hiding behind his computer anymore, not avoiding conversations, not searching for the fastest way to leave a room. He was leading meetings, helping new employees, presenting ideas to important clients. If someone had met him that day, they would probably say, he's naturally confident. But Ethan would have smiled, because he knew the truth. Confidence wasn't natural. It was built. One small, brave decision at a time. One Monday morning, his manager walked into his office. Ethan, we've received an invitation. An invitation? The manager nodded. A business conference. More than 1,000 people. They want someone to give a keynote speech. Ethan looked at him, then laughed quietly. A year ago, I couldn't even speak in front of 10 people. His manager smiled. I know. That's why I chose you. That evening, Ethan walked through the city. The streets were busy. People hurried to catch buses. Cars filled the roads. Coffee shops were crowded. Everything reminded him of the man he used to be, a man who believed everyone else was brave, except him. As he crossed the same bridge where he had once stopped in fear, he reached into his pocket. The coin was still there, old, scratched, simple. Begin. He smiled, then continued walking. The conference arrived. The building was enormous. Bright lights, huge screens, hundreds of business leaders, entrepreneurs, students, young professionals, more than 1,000 people. Backstage, his heart was beating fast again. His palms were sweaty. He laughed to himself. So, you're still here. Fear had returned, but this time, it sounded different. It no longer sounded like an enemy. It sounded like an old companion, a nervous companion, one that always appeared before something important. He remembered another lesson. Fear often stands at the entrance of opportunity. A woman approached him. Mr. Ethan, you're on in 2 minutes. He nodded. Thank you. He closed his eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to remember. He remembered the classroom, the laughter, the lonely walks home, the park, the old man, Sarah, the notebook, the presentation. Every difficult moment, every tiny victory, every small decision. They had all brought him here. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ethan Carter. The audience applauded. Ethan walked onto the stage. The lights were bright. He couldn't see every face, only silhouettes. Hundreds of them, waiting, listening. He stood behind the microphone. Silence filled the room. He smiled. Then he began. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ethan, and I used to be afraid of speaking. Some people smiled. Others leaned forward. I spent years believing that fear was my enemy. I was wrong. Fear wasn't stopping me. I was stopping myself. The room became completely quiet. I thought brave people weren't afraid. But I discovered something. The bravest people in the world feel fear too. They simply refuse to let fear make their choices. He paused, then asked the audience, how many of you have ever missed an opportunity because you were afraid? Slowly, hands began rising. 10, 20, 50, then hundreds. Ethan smiled. You see? None of us are alone. For the next 30 minutes, he shared his story, not to impress people, but to remind them that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they stop waiting to feel fearless. At the end of his speech, he reached into his pocket, the old coin. He held it up. This coin changed my life. The audience watched quietly. It has only one word. He turned it toward them. Begin. Whatever dream you've been delaying, whatever conversation you've been avoiding, whatever opportunity you've been running from, begin. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to feel ready. You only need one brave decision. Silence. Then, the entire audience stood up. A standing ovation. Not because Ethan was the greatest speaker, but because his story reminded everyone of their own fears. After the conference, people waited in line to meet him. One young man approached. He looked nervous. His hands were shaking. He quietly said, I've been afraid to follow my dream. Ethan smiled, without saying a word. He placed the old coin into the young man's hand. The young man looked surprised. I can't take this, Ethan smiled. Oh yes, you can. It was never mine. It was simply my turn to carry it. The young man looked down at the coin. then read the word, begin. Tears filled his eyes. Thank you, Ethan smiled. I hope one day you'll give it to someone else. Years later, people often asked Ethan, what was the moment that changed your life? They expected him to mention the promotion, the speech, the applause, the success. But he always gave the same answer. It wasn't the day I stopped being afraid. It was the day I decided that fear would no longer decide my future. Because fear will always knock on your door. The question is, will you invite it to drive your life? Or simply let it ride in the passenger seat? Every great journey, every dream, every success, every new beginning starts with one simple decision, one word. Begin. The end. Remember, fear is temporary. Regret can last a lifetime. So don't wait until you feel ready. Take the first step. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to move forward despite it. If you enjoyed this story and want to improve your English through inspiring stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.